and welcome back to the Domestic Supply Chain Summit, our virtual summit here at FreightWaves. Hope you've enjoyed the content so far. Today, we have a very special guest with us right here. My name is Kevin Hill, here with FreightWaves, and joined by Rosemary Coates, Executive Director and Chairman of the Board of the Reshoring Institute. Rosemary, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. So, the Reshoring Institute, it's a nonprofit. Do you mind giving us a little bit of background on that and kind of what your mission is?
Sure. So we started the organization going on 10 years ago now, right after the 2012 elections where Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were China bashing like crazy. And I had been doing lots of work in China. And because of that kind of conversation that was going on, a lot of executives I was working with asked me if there was a possibility that they could actually bring some manufacturing back. And so out of that grew a methodology for evaluating how to approach reshoring. And then out of that grew the Reshoring Institute. So we are, as you mentioned, a 501c3 nonprofit and nonpartisan organization. That's really important these days. We don't take sides. We just try to report, what's going on and how we help companies bring manufacturing back. And then 50% of our mission is to help teach graduate student interns about manufacturing. So we take paid interns from 14 universities across the nation, and we teach them about manufacturing. They do case studies and some deep dive research for us, and hopefully they get exposed to the manufacturing environment because they're going to be the manufacturing executives of the next century, and the well, maybe not the next century, but soon within the next 10 or 15 years. So they're going to be CEOs and managers, and it's important for them to understand what manufacturing is all about.
Certainly, the next decade. The next decade, they will be the leaders of manufacturing. Yes, I would. And it's been a popular topic, reshoring, over the last decade. But I think the pandemic in the last 2 years it's been a game changer for global supply chains, trade flow patterns, security, risk, capital. It's kind of thrown all those into a loop. What are your thoughts on the pandemic and kind of attitudes to reshoring and moving manufacturing and sourcing of goods around because of all the bottlenecks and challenges over the last couple of years?
So prior to the pandemic, most of the projects that we worked on were very economically focused. So could we get the labor rates down enough, or could we automate to extract labor? It was all about the dollars and cents. And businesses are economic animals. They make their decision based on costs and benefits. But the pandemic introduced risk, and that's a new dimension for considering where in the world to source and manufacture that wasn't heavily emphasized in the past. It wasn't that nobody considered it, just wasn't really emphasized. These days, because of the pandemic and the horrible things that companies underwent during the pandemic in terms of not being able to get parts and shortages and issues and logistics and on and on and on, now companies are looking at that decision to reshore as not only an economic decision, but also one that includes minimizing the risk and exposure to those kind of issues in supply chain. So yeah, I mean, reshoring is going gangbusters these days. A lot of activity, a lot of interest all around bringing manufacturing back.
There are. Let's talk about. We saw the risk over the last couple of years, and we were talking right before we hit record on this session about labor rates. And I was looking for some current information on labor rates last week, and really couldn't find it. Everything seemed to be from a decade ago, kind of labor parity of different manufacturing hubs around the world. But you told me that you had new, fresh research on it. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about labor rates around the world.
Yeah, so we started this research actually a couple of years ago and then put it aside for a while. But after the pandemic, it became very obvious that companies were looking for alternative places to manufacture. So we did a deep dive research project looking at 12 countries where companies were either coming from or there was a lot of activity in where they were going to manufacture. And we compared the labor rates in these 12 countries. We could have taken, 80 countries or whatever, but really we took the top countries where companies were moving to. And what we found was China is no longer in the low cost category. China has moved kind of to the middle, and labor rates are continuing to go up. So, and the on the low end now are Mexico, Vietnam, and India. So they have the lowest cost labor rates. That's important because if you have a product that has a lot of labor content, in other words, if you are a sewing company, you sew apparel, or athletic shoe manufacturer where you glue on those little squares on the bottom of your shoes, these are high touch labor content manufacturing sites, then you look for a low cost labor country. But if you don't have that much labor or you can extract labor by automating, then you have an opportunity to look at other countries where overall the economics make sense, including the US. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, and that brings up Mexico being one of those, and people call that nearshoring, right? So you have reshoring, nearshoring. I guess foreshoring would be Asia and maybe crossing an ocean. What are some of the trends between nearshoring and reshoring, and are they kind of part in the same parcel, or they really differentiated?
Well, there's all kinds of strategies and models. I would say at this point in time, most companies are that have been sourcing in China are looking at a China plus one strategy. So that means manufacturing in China and maybe leaving some manufacturing there to serve the Asian market. The Asian markets are growing at double digit growth of 12 to 14% year over year. And so it's really important that you're able to address your customer base in Asia. And so that means a lot of companies will keep manufacturing either in China or in another country in Asia, plus one other country. And oftentimes that is, well, hopefully it's the US, but it can be Mexico, perhaps. Vietnam is another good example. We used to say Poland, but now with the war in Ukraine, that's an unstable region of the world too. So it could be China plus one other country. It could be a China plus two other countries. I've also seen a number of our clients who are choosing to keep some manufacturing in low cost Asian countries, some in Mexico to address the North American market and take advantage of USMCA, and some in the US to address quick turnaround times for delivery to customers in the US. Amazon has taught us all to expect our stuff on our doorstep tomorrow. And that trickles down to the industrial environment too. So now industrial buyers are expecting to see deliveries happen really fast. And that means for the producers, they have to have inventory available and be able to deliver really quickly. And a lot of times that means you've got to manufacture in the US to address the US market.
Exactly right. If you want one day delivery, overnight delivery, everything has to be pretty local to a specific geography. What are some of the success stories? American manufacturers bringing manufacturing back, reshoring that back in the United States. Do you have a couple good case studies on that?
Yeah, we have lots of case studies. So we publish all of this on our websites, reshoringinstitute.org. We have a research tab that shows the case studies. But let me just draw on a couple of them. One of them is Big Ass Fans. You may have heard of them. I hadn't heard of them. I thought it was an odd name, but they're very famous. They make industrial fans for manufacturing environments mostly, and warehouses. They reshored one of their product lines because they had quality issues in China, and this happened a couple of years ago, so it's not as recent. Another one is WaterLogic, a really interesting company. They make the water filtration systems like you have in your break rooms where you fill up your water bottle. And they make that equipment, and they're a European company, headquartered in the UK, very popular throughout Europe. They were manufacturing in a very modern, fantastic factory in China, and their growth market was the U.S. So they were trying to figure out how to establish manufacturing in the U.S. through acquisition and through their own manufacturing plant. So we worked with them for a year and ended up selecting the Dallas Fort Worth area near the airport because they had so many international travelers. But we put together an approach where they could import. We do a lot of the import export work as well. I happen to be a licensed customs broker, so I get involved in a lot of the import stuff. But we put together a way that they could import some foreign parts and do the final assembly in the U.S. with one eye on redeveloping their supply base in the U.S. so they could completely manufacture with parts from the U.S. in the U.S. So we worked with them for an over a year. That was quite a success story and such an interesting product. They filter water at the point of dispensing, which is advanced technologies, and the water is much cleaner. Another one that comes to mind is GE. During Jack Welch's time as a CEO, they pretty much shipped all of their manufacturing of appliances to Asia, mostly in China. And when Jeff Immelt took over, he challenged the engineers to produce a product in the US that could be sold in the US. So they chose water heaters and developed a heat on demand water heater called the GeoSpring and started manufacturing that in the US. And eventually, they re engineered all their systems, took labor out wherever they could, they automated, they really did a wonderful job of producing this new product and reopened Appliance Park in Louisville. And put eventually they added some more product lines and put 4,000 people back to work in the Louisville area. I mean, just a tremendous success story. So those are just a few. There's lots of them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's true. That is a tremendous success story. When we think about technology and enabling, new tech investments in or advancements in the supply chain, and having that the ability to bring back, how's tech playing a role in reshoring here in America?
Technology plays a role in every single step in manufacturing and distribution. There's no question, and it's growing. So from uh, artificial intelligence that hooks machines together through sensors. So, for example, on the shop floor in a manufacturing environment, you've got machines that go at different rates. So one machine might be stamping out something at 1,000 per hour, and the next machine bends that metal, but they're only capable of 200 an hour. So you've got an imbalance right off the bat, and that causes big lumps of inventory between machines and so forth. In using artificial intelligence and the use of sensors, you can reorganize that so the machines are sequenced to move production or move inventory right along through the line. And that's one use of technology in manufacturing that's relatively new over the past few years. But there's certainly in logistics. Uh, Electric vehicles, automatic driving, all sorts of things that will improve productivity and safety. Warehousing, the use of robots to pick and to drones to count inventory. That's a new development where the drone will go up and down shelves and count inventory. So no, a person doesn't have to do that. I mean, this is really important for the movement towards better efficiency and lower costs.
So, final question here. But before we go, over the next decade, what are your predictions with reshoring? It could be a percentage, it could be a growth number, it could be kind of what you kind of lead with, what your predictions are over the next, say, 10 years.
I would say, I mean, it's hard to predict in terms of numbers, but I can tell you the movement to think strategically about your manufacturing environment is very prominent these days. So in the past, as I mentioned, it used to be that companies would think only about the economics. Where can I go where it's cheap? And I helped lots of companies do that for 15 or 20 years. We looked at where was the cheapest manufacturing environment, and often the answer was China. Today's environment is very different. And I think the future in the next 10 years, we're going to continue on that pathway to think strategically about where in the world to manufacture. And that includes cost as well as all the other considerations, including automation, including the market. Where is your market? Including the geopolitical environment, which is likely to change significantly in the next 10 years. uh, it's a little crazy right now, and I'm not sure it's going to get any better anytime soon. And so all these things contribute to that strategic thinking, and ultimately, I think companies are going to choose to bring at least some of their manufacturing back to the U.S.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Though the world is changing, we don't know exactly how, but it definitely is, from geopolitical to economic to everything. Rosemary, thanks so much for joining us here at the summit. And if you want to learn more about the Reshoring Institute, you can go to reshoringinstitute.org and find their great research and also case studies. But that wraps it up for this fireside chat. Continue watching here at freightwaves.com for more exciting content coming up here on the Domestic Supply Chain Summit.